Here we are trying to recover from a global pandemic that has killed more than 700,000 Americans. It shut down thousands of small businesses and put millions out of work. We don't have time to be wasting on these phony, trumped-up culture wars, this fake outrage that right-wing media peddles to juice their ratings. And the fact that he's willing to go along with it instead of talking about serious problems that actually affect serious people, that's a shame. That's not what this election's about. That's not what you need, Virginia. Instead of forcing our communities to cut back at a time when we're just starting to recover, we should be doing more to support people who are educating our kids and keeping our neighborhoods safe. Instead of spreading misinformation and disinformation about the last election, we should be trying to strengthen our democracy and make it easier for more people to vote in future elections. Instead of stoking anger aimed at school boards and administrators who are just trying to keep our kids safe, who are just doing their jobs, stoking anger to the point where some of them are actually getting death threats. We should be making it easier for teachers and schools to give our kids the world-class education they deserve, and to do so safely while they're in the classroom.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to keep this series alive. You guys know the series. The series is called The State of the Church After Trump. And I wanted to bring it across in such a way because I feel like we cannot sugarcoat the American people. I feel like there's a lot of sugarcoating out there. I feel like and the most important thing is that people don't want it sugar-coated, because people see what's going on in this country and people want to know. So I'm going to introduce these two gentlemen, these two men of God. First, I want to introduce Pastor Jones from the Love Fellowship Tabernacle. Pastor Jones, where is that at? Where?
Yes, so we're located at 464 Liberty Avenue,
Okay.
and Bradford. That's in the heart of East New York.
Okay, that's East New York. And we have Reverend Dr. Von Merritt, founder and pastor of Word Alive Church in Christ, located in Birmingham, Alabama. Thanks for being here, pastors.
Grace and peace.
Thank you.
I just want to get right into it. This bullet point is coming from the Pew Research, pewresearch.com. And it says about 7 in 10 white non-Hispanic Americans who attend religious services at least monthly, 71% voted for Trump, while roughly a quarter, 27%, voted for Biden. Among white Americans who attend religious services a few times a year or less, far fewer voted for Trump, 46%, while around half, 52%, voted for Biden. I just want to mention another bullet point here. It's from usnews.com. Evangelicals have been recognized as pivotal players in the American political landscape, at least since the election of President Jimmy Carter. As a vital component of the value voter bloc, along with conservatives, Roman Catholics, they are even credited with making the crucial differences in the 2004 presidential race. That being said, my question to both of you is why, in your opinion, do white Christian conservatives in Christ have such political influence in this country?
Well, I would say when you look at the history of all that we have seen, and we have, all that we've gone through, the numbers are very staggering. And when you look at the white versus the blacks, unfortunately, the whites have somewhat always outnumbered us. But I believe that it's time for us as people of, it's time for us as the church, it's time for us to stand up, and when we take our rightful place, then we can begin to see the change that we want to see. But until we become one as a people, until we become, I would say, unified, then the numbers that we want to see, we're not going to see. So I mean, I would say it's like disturbing to see people that don't look like us. Somehow they tend to have the upper hand. But I do believe that we can turn it around. I do believe that people of color, we have the opportunity to turn that around.
Pastor Von Merritt?
Yeah, actually, it's the interesting thing is, if we study historically the United States, this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, we've seen this movie before. At the forefront, even during the 60s and the civil rights movement, the quote unquote evangelical church that is largely made up of white Americans, they were against the civil rights movement. So what we're seeing now is not some new phenomenon, and it kind of amazes me sometimes, even how the media and the news reports on it. We tend to see these things as though they're happening in a vacuum rather than in a continuum. Because again, this has been a part of the pattern of American life since the very founding of this country. The very notion of the idea that we have a church that, instead of being called the church, we have the Black church, we have the evangelical church, we even have white and Black evangelical churches. So my answer to that is basically, we have to stop. We have to stop sort of discussing this as though it's some new phenomenon. This is a part of the continuum of American history, basically, particularly of American history.
I feel like one of the things that is new, I guess that Democrats have always talked about, was that what would happen if the Supreme Court became mostly Republican with the ideology of quote unquote biblical principles, if you will. And so we have for example, we have the abortion non type of explanation that the Supreme Court let stay, and now you kind of have the country, the state of Texas in limbo, and we see how it can hurt people of color. It can hurt single mothers. It could hurt men as well, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is that where in the Bible does it talk about abortion?
Well, there are several verses in the Bible, but as it pertains to that question, I'm reminded when there was a story in the Bible where this mother, when she had her child, and she brought her child to Jesus, and when we look at abortion, the abortion rate right now that's like one of the big talks of that's one of the big talks right now, and there are laws right now that they're trying to pass to try to stop abortions. But I mean, for one, I would even go as far to say that I believe that, abortion is a sin. Because I believe that if you're going to have a child, then you should do your best to raise that child. Why have kids and in your heart that you're not going to take care of the kids? So this has been an issue that I have personally worked with, because not only am I a pastor, but I'm in the community every single day. And so me talking to mothers and, me dealing with people that have been, abused, and they are looking for answers. I had a young lady about 2 weeks ago, and this was the situation. She had been raped and whatever, you know what I mean? And she came to me, like she called me, and she said she wanted to talk. So when I met up with her, basically she began to tell me, all that she was going through, and she says to me, she don't want to have this child, because if she have the child, she won't be able to look at the child when the child is born, because of the experience that she has gone through. Because it wasn't something that she wanted to do, but she was forced to do something that she didn't want to do. And as a result of that, now she's pregnant. So I had to say, listen, I mean, I said, I'm sorry that, it happened to you, but I don't want you to even think about putting the blame on the child.
There's got to be a bridge, because what we're seeing right now, they took away that bridge. That bridge was a woman's, not to mention that Planned Parenthood, not only that, they take care of plenty of women's health services. So I still come back to it, Pastor Von Merritt. I come back to a situation of where in the Bible does it say, or even that it even talks about abortion?
Well, for me personally, I think the whole abortion issue, first off, it shouldn't be a political issue. It shouldn't be an institutional issue. And what I think that when the quote church makes its number one issue abortion, it exposes a couple of things. One, it exposes hypocrisy because we call ourselves Christians and we say, well, we're on this mission to stop abortions. I don't see anywhere in the New Testament or even in the Old Testament where God says we're supposed to stand against abortion. We're supposed to stand against sin, all sin. We're not supposed to, oh, well, this sin is greater than that sin, because listen, God does not grade on a curve. It's all sin to him. And we are supposed to be an holy people who stand against sin. So by highlighting the abortion issue, and I defy any pastor, I've been teaching and preaching for 20 years. I still can't find in the Bible, and particularly in the New Testament and the Gospels, anywhere where Jesus says anything about abortion. The way my Bible reads, in Matthew chapter 28, he tells us, go and preach the gospel. Go and baptize and teach in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. We are to go and give the world the gospel. We are not called to be this sort of last stand against abortion and that sort of thing. So to me, the whole idea of the anti-abortion movement actually being spearheaded by the church and led by the church is a falsehood. It exposes, like I said, in my mind, it exposes the hypocrisy, in particular, of the so-called evangelical church. So in my mind, Jesus didn't speak about it. We're not supposed to be out here fighting about it. You understand? Listen, all the Bible says there is none righteous, not one. All of us have sins, okay? It's not for any of us to highlight or call ourselves exposing the sins of others. Not only that, but we're not called to pass judgment. We're not called to pass judgment on people. Listen, my sins are between me and the Father. And your sins are between you and the Father. Christ died for the sins of us all. And so we have to, particularly when it comes to this abortion issue, as a pastor and as a church pastor, of course I would teach that abortion is wrong. It's a sin. But we can't highlight one sin above any others. It's all sin to God, and we have to refrain from that. Now, how a woman or a man and a woman who are in a situation and how they deal with that and whatever choices they make in that, then they have to make their own peace with God about that. It's not for me to say, oh, it's not for me to cast judgment on them.
Absolutely, because I feel like, obviously we've seen this move to the right in the Supreme Court. We had a president who held up the Bible backwards. We had a president that nominated these far right judges. And what I can't help but think is like they're running to the right. Like it's like a race to get to the right. It's a race to try to pass the most extreme laws in the country. And it goes right back to pleasing the base of the of evangelicals. But then I started thinking, in other countries, we have they rule by religion. If every pastor in the United States or that claims Jesus, right, was to sit down in a meeting with people in the Middle East and discuss religion, it would be difficult it would be hard for me to believe if a pastor from this country came back and said, we got that other country's religion, we got them to say that they were wrong, right? They believe in their religion, they stand behind their religion. My point is that if in this country we start passing laws based on religion, we may end up like these other countries in the Middle East, because that's how they rule. And any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge, is that America needs to stop acting like a pseudo-theocracy. We are not a theocracy. We are a pluralistic democracy. And one of the things that separates a democracy from a theocracy is, by literal definition, a theocracy is a society set up around a particular scripture. Islamic theocracies are set up around the Quran. Christian theocracies are set up around the Bible. But the issue is that, again, that's why a lot of this, in my mind, exposes a certain kind of hypocrisy that should be obvious to folks, but it's apparently not, because it's cloaked in politics and all of these other things. But for example, this notion that America was founded as a Christian nation. America has never declared itself to be a Christian nation. But at the same time, you have this phenomenon of basically, and we need to just call it what it is, basically white supremacy cloaking itself in the Christian religion. Wow. And so
that's deep.
That's where we find ourselves today, because we have to realize the same people that are expounding all these biblical virtues and we're Christians, these were the same people that 150 years ago, just 150, maybe 170 years ago, owned slaves, owned us as slaves. And guess what? They used the Bible to justify that then. So again, it goes back to my point in the beginning. We have to stop looking at all this stuff as though it's new, different, isolated ideologies and theologies. No, it's part of a continuum that has been going on in this country since even before this country was a country. We can never forget that. The same people who, while they were owning other human beings,
right, they
still fancied themselves models of Christian virtue and theological correctness, are the same people that we're dealing with now.
Pastor Jones, that being noted, do you feel like the evangelical ideology, if you will, or whatever they are cloaking in, do you feel like that is holding back progress in this country?
Well, let me say this. Let me piggyback off what the other pastor said. With all that we're seeing right now, I think the bottom line is this, is that it's time for America to come back to God. If we want any kind of progress in this country, America has got to come back to God. There's so much going on, with the pandemic and everything else. I think this is a sign, and I think, a lot of people are not paying attention to the signs. All that we see going on now, this is nothing new under the sun. This has been around for years and years. But if we are going to see any kind of progress, then it's time for America to come back to God. It's time for us to really get serious, about our prayer life. And if we want, like, because even when the former president was in office, my prayer every day, even though I didn't agree with some of the things he was saying, but I believe that that even God can turn the heart of this man. And we as a country, we went through 4 years of slavery, if you will. And so, now that we are slowly coming out of it, we still have some work to be done. In terms of the evangelicals, I believe that in some way, yes, this is a and I want to use my words very carefully, but in some way there is a slowdown in the progress where we need to be. So I mean, can we change this? Absolutely. But we all got to be on one accord, because the Bible says, "My people, which are called by my name, would humble themselves and pray and seek my face." See, if we need to get back to seeking the face of God, and when we do that, we can watch God turn the situation all around.
I mean, we are in this situation. We're in a hole, basically, politically speaking, and we kind of have to dig ourselves out politically. But one of the ways I feel like we can dig ourselves out of this is by talking and talking about these issues and shining a light on it. Pastor Jones, what do you think the position of the church needs to be in order, because frankly right now people are not looking at the church for leadership, especially after and I'm not putting the whole church together in one group, but some people out there do. They see what's going on, and they look at the church and they say, okay, you know what? The church cannot lead us anywhere right now. What do you think the position of the church needs to be at a time like this in order to not only shine some light on the situation, but also lead us to a better day, if you will?
Well, let me say this. We have been through a very, very difficult year with this pandemic, and we've lost so many people. I've lost members in my church, and I have friends that I've lost. And so, when the pandemic first hit and there was a big announcement that the church was going to close. Now, we all know that we are the church, but the building itself. And, it's amazing to me how during the time they had the liquor stores open, but yet the church building was closed. Now, I always thought that the church was part of the government. So how is it that you can leave the liquor stores open but close the doors of the church? So, I mean, if the pandemic have taught us anything, it should have taught us how to pray. Because without a prayer life, without a constant prayer life, we are not going to make it. And so I'm a firm believer that prayer can change any and everything. And I also believe that if prayer don't change your situation, that prayer will and can change you in the situation. So for me, for my beliefs and for my ministry and for, I'm a very firm believer, in prayer. So the church as a whole, like we've got to get back, because when you look at the church, it's like there's no reference for the church no more. See, I came up in a time where there were certain things you couldn't wear to church. You know what I mean? When you came inside the church building, you showed some kind of reverence or respect for the house of worship. But now people come to church and they dress like they're going to the club. Bible says to present your body a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. But when you look at what we have today, people, they dress like they're going to the club. So it's hard to tell, well, are you going to church or are you going to party? So those of us that's in the church, those of us that's ministers, the pastors and so on, we have got to be set apart, and we have to stand out so that people can see our good works. And everything that we do should be glorifying God. We should be leading people to Christ so that He and He alone can get the glory.
Pastor Von Merritt, I asked this question before, and I just wanted to get your take on it. A lot of people in the church, they say they have this phrase that they use: God knows everything, God is in control. And to a certain extent, it kind of hints that some kind of way this virus was in the will of God. When people bring it up, it's like it's kind of like this notion that is given that that some kind of way this virus was. In other words, I should just ask you straight out: do you believe that this virus was sent from God?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't believe that the virus was sent from God. I don't believe that the situation with this pandemic is something that was sent from God. But here's the thing: as God's people, we learn to accept and move with what God allows. Now, whenever God allows something for like this to happen, as God's people, our task is to look at it and see what God is trying to do. For example, Word Alive Church in Christ was founded on May 1st, 2020. And when the Lord told me to start the church, particularly this is right around the time that the pandemic was really starting to explode. And so, of course, my answer was, well, God, why would I want to start a church in the middle of a pandemic where other churches are now talking about closing down? And here was the thing that God told me: I want to show my people that even when there's death and destruction all around, and people are saying, oh, the church is dead, this is really just going to kill the church, I want to show them that even in the midst of death and destruction, God can bring life. Even in the beginning in the Bible, it says in Genesis, the earth was void and without form, and darkness covered the face of the deep. But the Spirit of God was still moving over the waters. We do have a history. A lot of the leadership from the church evolves from our history. And the only reason why we are not in the place today that the church was maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago is because, again, a lot of it has to do with the politicization of the church, and a lot of it has to do with, and we've got to start calling that out. We've got to start calling out.
Absolutely.
We've got to start calling out what I call white supremacy, calling itself Christianity.
Wow.
Okay, in the 60s, that's what the Black church did. They showed the world what true Christianity is. And so, Word Alive Church in Christ, we're just, and we really see ourselves as just a seed. We want the Word Alive Church in Christ community campus to be the model that perhaps other churches will look at and say, you know what? They've got an idea there. If you want the church to be at the heart of the community, then what you've got to do is you've got to start from the church, building the community. One of the things, and before I finish, just let me say one of the things, and I think I've actually preached a sermon on this. One of the things that I think that in my mind for the church has been a good outcome from the pandemic is it made us get back to the Great Commission, right? We've gotten into this place where we're comfortable. The church is uncomfortable. The church has become insular. We're not going out to reach the people. We're sitting in our comfortable air-conditioned sanctuaries waiting for the people to come to us. What this pandemic has done is it has forced us to do what Jesus commanded us to do. He said, go ye therefore into all nations, baptizing and teaching them to observe. So one of the things that I think is a benefit of the pandemic is it's forced us to have to take the gospel back to the people instead of sitting in the pews and just sort of waiting and doing all sorts of programs and things to try to attract people to the church. It's forced us to do what the Lord commanded us to do in the first place, which is take the word to the people, go out to the people, and then bring them into the church.
We have a lot of things going on in our politics. We just had an election that happened November 2nd. It was exactly a year from Joe Biden's election as president. To air this stuff out, I have two people joining me that can offer a lot of great perspective on these things. I have C. Bella, entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Mirror Me Fashion. And I have Mark Edward Powell. I said that right? There you go.
Absolutely, just like Gomer. Yep.
Mark Edward Powell, Chief Esoteric Educational Officer. Thanks, you guys, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us.
You know what? The elephant is in the room, if you will. No pun intended. You know what I mean? Politically speaking, we just had a huge election across the country, and November 2nd. And I just want to offer some enlightenment for the people that's watching. In the state of Virginia, we saw the Republican candidate, Youngkin, win Virginia. Now, all the press was focused on Virginia. Meanwhile, there was a bunch of other elections across the country. Okay? But I think and you know how the media loves to romanticize these kind of political stories, and hey, they do what they do. Here we got to get to the point, and we got to get to the issues. But since they are concentrating on Virginia, and that is somewhat of the future going into the midterm elections, let's talk about that. I have a question that Mark can. Mark, why do you think the Republican voters' number one issue in Virginia was critical race theory?
I don't believe it was critical race theory as much as it was McAuliffe's own words on stage on September 28th when he, out of his own mouth, said parents do not have the right to discuss or know what is being taught to their kids at school, which immediately shifted the campaigns of Youngkin and of McAuliffe. It stopped those campaigns and turned what Youngkin was doing into a movement. It was more of a referendum against, how dare you tell us that we can't come to these meetings and ask and inquire about what's being taught to our kids. That's basically what it was. They boiled it down to a one issue race. And for those people in Virginia, those parents in Virginia were the ones who got Youngkin elected. And it just wasn't conservative or Republican parents. It was some Democrat parents as well. Because this, like you said, this 1 year after Joe Biden was elected, and he skunked Trump in Virginia by almost 16 points.
He did. Right.
So for a Republican to come in and win the governorship by 2 or 3 points, that is really foretelling. But that wasn't the only one. In Seattle, they elected a conservative prosecutor because the people of Seattle, the regular citizens of Seattle, had enough of their city being overtaken. So they got that George Soros prosecutor out of there and put a conservative prosecutor in there. The city of Minneapolis, where the whole defund the police movement started, they overwhelmingly voted not to defund the police. So it was more than just the Youngkin. Youngkin is what the press and the media put their hat on, but this is more of a, okay, we took a wild swing way left with Biden, and now this is just a course correction. It really wasn't something that was shocking to me. I saw it coming because that's what happens after a guy gets elected in and it's another party. Then here comes the blue wave if it's a conservative, or the red wave if it's a Republican, so or Democrat. So this is just how American politics go. It's nothing to see here, really. This could be Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles could have saw this.
See, Bella, after what we saw with the school board meetings, okay, we had school board meetings going for about 6 or 8 months. It almost immediately it was a groundswell, if you will, started with the critical race theory that bleeded into these school board meetings. So maybe you can respond and kind of piggyback off of what Mark said about these parents flipping on a dime because they were offended because McAuliffe said that, that parents shouldn't be, or whatever his statement was. What was it that made these parents flip on a dime just on that issue to vote for Youngkin so remarkably?
To me, it's just that Republicans are effective at speaking to people and creating controversy where none exists. Republicans had lost, I think, the white female vote because of Trump. A lot of them were outraged at his behavior. And this time around, they were able to win back the white female vote by creating an issue. Critical race theory, as we know, is a non-issue because critical race theory isn't taught in high school. It's taught in colleges. And so they were able to use race as a reason Republicans deal in dog whistle politics quite often, and it's effective and it works. It's a shame how Democrats are unable to get across our message and talk about policy and to be able to communicate to voters in a way that's effective, because everything the Republican Party is doing is a sham, and they're undermining democracy, and everything is about some sort of controversy, some sort of made up issue. And I'm not sure exactly what it is about Democrats, but it seems like we're afraid to get outraged, to get passionate, and to just speak to people one-on-one. Now, Virginia is a bit of a unique situation because we know that it flip-flops every election cycle.
Every 2 or 4 years, yeah.
Right. But given the state of things, I think we all were hopeful and wanted for the Democrat to win in that state.
Especially in the face of SCOTUS, especially in the face of that Texas abortion law. Go ahead.
Right, exactly. Now, abortion should have been an issue that the Democrats should have rode on in order to win voters. Democrats did not effectively pull in Black voters.
Yeah, I wanted to. Absolutely,
that's what we really need to talk about.
Yeah,
the Black voters.
Yeah, hold on one second. Let me just piggyback off of what she just said. You mentioned Black voters, and Black voters in this cycle was down. Okay, and from what we know, Black voters didn't show up like they did in the presidential. So when you look at history and you look at how long Black voters have been able to vote, you look at the history on when white voters have been able to vote. White voters have been voting in this country since George Washington. In the middle of slavery, they have been voting. And the tradition, if you will, has just came all the way down the line. We're in 2021. Republicans and white voters go to the polls now
on voting day. Yes.
Now, my question is though, do you think? Now, I don't want to get in trouble by people, but this question has to be asked. Do you think Black voters need more information on how local elections impact their lives directly?
I think Black voters need to come out of groupthink and look at the issues that affect Black people and vote your conscience, not necessary party allegiance.
Well, like my point is that even if they wasn't voting Democrat, or let's just say they was going to go out and vote Republican,
and your vote.
What I'm saying is they did not show up.
Local elections. That's where your vote.
Black voting was down, and so my point is.
I'm listening. Go ahead.
And so my point is Black voters come out in the presidential election in droves.
Right.
Matter of fact, we can shift and pull and do what we got to do, especially in democratic politics.
Well,
so my question to C. Bella, though, really quick, Mark, is that do you think Black voters need more information, considering their short history in voting, on local elections and how it affects their lives?
I absolutely, they need more information, but I think more so than anything, we need to sort of set the expectation for Black voters. I think that when you're new to voting and a person who hasn't been a consistent voter feels like, okay, my vote doesn't count. So then you turn around and you say, you know what, this time around, I'm going to go ahead and vote. And then the person you vote for, they don't deliver in the way that this person expected them to in what has it been? How long has Biden been in office? A year? Not even? And they're expecting all these magical things to happen in such a short span of time. So I think a lot of it is, listen, you have to understand that you have to continuously show up and you have to continuously vote. And then an understanding of, okay, your vote really does matter. And when you come out to these local elections, they sometimes matter more than the much larger presidential election.
They always matter more. Yeah.
So that has to be understood, but it has to be a commitment to continuing to vote.
It's a life
continuing
commitment
to show up
Absolutely.
so that your voice can be heard, because
Absolutely.
nothing's going to happen in one cycle. And actually, I think that Biden has done a lot of really great things and rescued us in many respects, even with the stimulus, with the checks that we received. That pulled a lot of people out of poverty. These are things that Democrats are really poor at communicating to people and really marketing themselves and their accomplishments, because some wonderful things have happened. But I think different expectations need to be set. When you vote, the next day, your life is not going to all of a sudden become wonderful. Everything is not just going to change in such a short period of time.
It's about understanding how our democracy works.
Absolutely.
Sometimes when a policy is put forward, or even, I spoke to some people, and some people thought that when we voted Biden in office, that he was automatically in the White House. They did not know that it took 2 months or 3 months, if you will, for the transition to happen for him to get into office.
And there are procedures and dates that are hard fixed in the Constitution, that it don't matter if it's a landslide victory in November, they still are the president-elect until after they take the oath of office, and anything can happen all the way up until the time the oath is begun.
Absolutely.
Mark, do you think that Republican voters need to be more educated on the history of this country?
I believe the Republican voters and the base for the Republican Party, I believe that there does need to be a full education for all of them, and I think it should be for everybody, not just the Republicans. But more importantly, I believe that the Republican Party needs to reach back to their Nixonian years and to their Reagan years, and get back to the fiscal conservatism that always won well with the mass of America, that the America that we grew up in. They have gotten too far off track, and they can't talk about Biden spending when they just blew out the bank 4 years ago. So there really isn't anything that they can really talk about that, and because of the natural divide that is built in the fabric of America, I don't give it the respect to put an A on it. It's America to me.
America.
Yeah. It's built in the fabric. Whenever you start something and you only give it two options, red or blue, Democrat or Republican, whatever the names of them were, it was only two, you automatically cause a division that will never be cured. This country talks about, all these politicians come up there on their soapbox and talk about unity and bringing things together. You can't bring America together. America ain't built to be together.
Here's the question that I have for Republicans.
Never built to be together.
Here's the question that I do have for Republicans, okay? Why do they not expect more out of their moderate candidates? For example, you got Susan Collins, you got Mitt Romney, you got these people that should care about central issues. I mean, when you got state governments passing laws dramatically, these moderates need to step in and say, hey, look, let's moderately look at these things. Why do you think that's not happening?
Well, you just triggered the libertarian in me. I don't think the federal government has a right to tell a state what they can or can't do. Federal government needs to stay out of the state's business. So any federal intervention into anything in the state, I am against all the way. Because I'm a libertarian and I believe in states' rights.
Well, Mark, you know that term state rights is a term that goes back to the days of slavery.
I don't care what it goes back to. I'm talking about right now, 2021, in a modern day interpretation. States' rights still means that state has the right to govern their state and their populace the way they seem fit.
See, Bella,
and whatever laws that their state passes, that's on them. If the people in those states don't like the laws, move the hell out of the state.
See, Bella, we have
that's what I did with Cali. I got sick of California and their laws. I moved out of California.
See, Bella, we have that same situation that Mark is describing out in Texas. And we see how that abortion law is affecting other states that's next to it. So it's like when we say the United States of America, yeah, we're the United States of America, and how much right, if you will, how much right does the states have without the federal government? The federal government is the guideline of this thing, no?
I think the federal government has a role to play in how decisions are made. We are one country, one nation. And so just to a certain extent, the federal government, yes, there are certain things that I don't believe states are able to govern on their own. And the example you just mentioned about abortion rights is a prime example. You know, you have states like Texas circumventing the Constitution by putting in place laws that make it more difficult for women to have abortions. And what's happening? You have women now going into other states to try to get abortions, scrambling to try to figure out, what to do. And these are personal health decisions, and the state is interfering with that ability. I do not believe that the federal government should be all encompassing and all powerful. And I do believe it has its place. Sometimes I do believe that the federal government may sort of overstep its boundaries, and there's a lot of situations where states should be able to govern themselves. But there are other things where absolutely the federal government has a critical role to play in maintaining law, maintaining order, and just making sure that things run smoothly because we're a nation. And whatever is in the Constitution needs to be abided by. So there's definitely a place for the federal government.
Well, Mark, let me give you.
I'm a centrist Democrat.
Yeah, I love your type of Democrat because that's not what I was hearing last year and in 2020. So yeah.
Well, let me ask. I'm
more of a centrist.
Let me ask a question.
All right, brother.
Mark, from your standpoint, would you like to see the GOP go toe to toe with the Democrats more on policy rather than cultural issues?
I would rather both parties go toe to toe on policy, but what I'm putting this back on who really has the power if we really exercise it, and that's the people. I want Black America, regardless of who is elected, I want us to start holding politicians' feet to the fire like all these other groups did that get their right and get their shit passed. We need a better lobby. We don't have nobody speaking on our issues. There's nobody in Washington lobbying for the issues that matter for Black America. There's the Congressional Black Caucus. How come we ain't stringing them up every year. How come we're not bringing them in somewhere and sitting their asses down and asking them, why aren't you guys doing this, and this? Why are we holding the ones who do get elected to their feet to the fire? Why are we just so far on one side or so far on the other? And then, like you say, if it's not a presidential election, we don't come out. Well, we ain't needed in them. We only needed to get the old boy over the line.
Well, see, here's
But
the
part
here's,
of the reason, part of the reason why it's that way is because Republicans have been for, I want to say decades now, been implanting these ideas in people's heads. I don't think the Republican base is well versed in any of the issues. Yeah, both parties should speak about policy and win voters over based on their agenda. But Republicans are able to win these elections based purely on cultural issues.
Well,
And
yeah.
they can make up any sort of, even with this whole critical race theory thing. You know, you
the
have
big lie.
these reporters going to these places and asking, right, they're asking, what is you'll have someone, oh yeah, I'm voting because, you know, I don't want critical race theory in our schools. And then the reporter goes, well, what is critical race theory? And they go, I don't know. and this is an example of how the Republican base has no idea what the issues are.
And it's an insult. And it's an insult
based on policy.
It's an insult to those people. The other day, I saw in the state of Virginia a video showing QAnon how they were waiting on JFK to come through a street.
Are you kidding me?
It is an absolute insult,
you know
and
what?
people should be outraged by it.
Let's talk about, wait. Let's talk about the video
but they're laughing at.
Let's talk about the video I saw of the Black parents who were complaining about their kids getting taught critical race theory. There is just not a Republican issue. And you're right, critical race theory is not being taught per se. There's no critical race theory curriculum. It's been taught in colleges since the middle 70s. So by theory, the teachers who were taught that
in law schools,
Yeah.
Critical race theory is taught in law school.
And it used to be, and they just switched it. It was about economic class, and now they just made it about race and something else. So it's nothing new.
Look how effective Republicans are in taking a term that has nothing to do with race and transform it into something entirely different. They haven't stopped calling it critical race theory, even though they understand quite clearly that has nothing to do with critical race theory as it is known to be. And now they've created this whole thing around it, and they're going to market it that way. And it sounds so scary, critical race theory, you know.
Well,
Christopher Rufo made that up.
No, they embarrass the heck out of their voters constantly.
The Republican strategist named Christopher Rufo planted that in Republican politics and had parents acting a fool at those meetings. He did that. You could look it up on Google.
Yeah, but it wasn't just Republican parents that was acting a fool. I saw a lot of inner city Blacks and Hispanics parents that were at those meetings. And speaking of Hispanics, it was the Hispanics in Virginia that pushed Youngkin over the top. You know, they are quote unquote traditionally Democratic, but yeah, they overwhelmingly chose Youngkin. And
I'm waiting to see what the demographics was. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm waiting to see what the demographics exactly
numbers
was.
on the Black and the white vote yet, but they did have a number on the Hispanic vote.
It's not surprising because a lot of times, the Republicans are the only ones speaking to people. And just like the election, like the Hillary race, you had a lot of Democrats saying crooked Hillary. That was something invented on the right in order to sabotage Hillary, and it was effective.
That's politics. It'd be a whole bunch of dirty shenanigans be going on the campaign trail. Both sides are equally guilty of that, and both have got their hands dirty in that. So that's not just a exclusively Republican thing. That is exclusively political.
They had 20-30 years to work on Hillary.
To talk to people. They have a huge PR problem.
I want to talk about the foreign policy of this whole thing. Now, when you look at, quote, the big lie,
Okay.
when you look at the critical race theory, when you look at the educational piece of it, school board meetings, did Vladimir Putin do what he needed to do? Because when the whole Facebook thing that happened in the previous election, now we have people fighting each other on stupid issues that really have no business being in our politics. And we also have public officials, let's be real, public officials under investigation regarding January 6th. So my question is
Right.
did Vladimir Putin, with his misinformation campaign in 20, what was it, what year, whatever Trump was running for president, was that effective to wherein now the United States of America's democracy is possibly in limbo?
Right. I think he's been quite effective, but the mission hasn't been carried out all the way. I think what Trump tried to do by stealing the election, it was a dry run. I believe they're taking notes. They're setting everything up. They're putting the right people in the right places so that next time around, they'll be able to go ahead and steal elections. I mean, they're gerrymandering the heck out of a lot of these districts, but it's
setting up
beyond that.
Secretary of States in each setting up the Secretary of States of each state to be
correct.
able to, right. What was you
Correct. But what you're also talking about is the civil war that's sort of bubbling underneath the surface that hasn't quite come to a head yet, and is there and it's real. And Facebook is a tool that's being used to incite people and to push everyone to one side or the other. And I believe that the mission is nearly complete. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of faith in Democrats to be able to save us, because Democrats are too weak and too passive, and they don't stand up and fight for us with this sort of urgency that the moment requires, because our democracy is under threat, and that's the unfortunate part. Democracy is not guaranteed, and we have a quite fragile democracy because Vladimir has been quite successful in, trying to undermine the thing that we pretend to stand for as the United States of America.
Mark, what do you think about that?
First, I believe you guys are giving Putin way more credit than he really deserves. And second, I believe what is happening currently in America has very little to do with Russian disinformation or Russian interference in any election. The Russians have been interfering in our elections since the 1930s, and that's just part of politics as well. What's really going on in America is something that is more spiritual than it has to do with some hacking or anything like that. Yeah, that has gone on, and there have been campaigns on both sides that affected elections. But what is really going on is when America was launched, when back in the day, for every colony or every new country, there is a cycle of so many years that it runs, and then the cycle ends. I agree with you about the fragility of our democracy, but our democracy, America's democracy, has been fragile from the second day after it was started. It is no more fragile today than it has always been, and that is because of the way it was established, it really isn't a democracy. It is a capitalistic theocracy, actually, between the people with money and the people in these high spiritual positions are the ones who really run this thing. The Democrats and Republicans, they're just puppets for a greater movement that is going on. Their time is up, and that's why there is such outrage, because it's you guys remember when you were in school and your teacher had an hourglass on her desk and you would sit there and you see all the sand run out. Well, then when you turned it over, you turn everything that was in the bottom, it gets upside down. That's all that's happening. This is supposed to happen. There were cosmic events that happened and that let me know that it's going to be like this until March 7th, 2023. That's when the new emerging of society, not only in America, but all across the globe, will happen. This is more than just the Democrat versus Republican and American democracy thing. This is a whole reset for society, and it's time. And I, for one, am glad that it is happening.
I definitely believe that there's a spiritual aspect to life, but in this particular circumstance, a foreign power has not been so successful in infiltrating American politics. Never in the
all
past.
The time, the Chinese have been since the 80s.
There has always. You were absolutely. You're absolutely right. Absolutely,
it's nothing
absolutely,
new.
but never have they been so successful
yes,
in
they
infiltrating
have. Always been
one
successful.
particular. Not to this extent.
Yes,
not to this
they
extent.
have.
And
yes,
right now, in our history, we've experienced we've experienced great atrocities. I mean, slavery, civil rights movement, and so there has been some fighting amongst the races. But in modern society, we haven't seen the sort of vitriol between the races, and a lot of it is spurred on by propaganda being fed through social media. And Russia is predominantly responsible for the content that's being fed to people.
I don't give it that much power. You guys are giving social media posts.
It is. Listen, social media has a tremendous amount of power. This is where people get their news every day. People are feeding into, and any bull crap that somebody puts on a freaking video is something that people believe.
I get that part.
Right. And a foreign power like Russia understands that fact. And so what they did during this past election, the cycle before that, they were successful in getting Trump elected.
No, what got Trump elected was Hillary was a bad candidate. That's what got Donald.
Absolutely not.
Yes, she was a bad candidate.
She was not.
Yes, she was.
She was not.
Yes,
she was not. She
yes.
was not.
Yeah, she's still flawed.
What I'll say is this: it's a lack of education. It's a lack of education regarding our democracy. It's a lack of knowing what history was. They say history sometimes repeats itself, but it definitely rhymes. And if Republican voters, in my opinion, knew more about what happened yesterday, they would be able to know better what needs to go on in the future. They know,
brother. They know. They're
all of this made up stuff with QAnon, all of this social media stuff that they're learning on the internet,
the Steele dossier,
and all of that nonsense. But you could go into the Steele dossier, but just because in our politics, we. There are people.
So it's okay for one side, but not the other. So
no, what I'm saying is that dossier and that whole thing regarding that investigation did not let Trump off the hook. That was an indictment on Trump.
But the Steele dossier was false from the beginning, and then they spied on Americans because of
the dossier was one of the circumstantial evidence that led them to what they know now.
But all of that was false. Okay, we didn't come to discuss that. You're right.
You know, that's the look. I tell you what. One thing about some black folks from the experience of being in the hood, a lot of times we know how investigations go. You know, we know what circumstantial evidence is, and we know how police make a case. Mm-hmm. And some of us in this country don't know how police officers make a case. And I will submit that the FBI has a lot of things on this case that they are not letting out to the general public. And if people knew anything about investigations, they would know that Trump should be looking over his shoulder. I want to thank. I want to thank you guys for being on the show.
Everything on Trump, they would have let it out, brother. The way they got a Woody for him, they would have let it all.
Not necessarily true.
No, there's so. I mean, Trump's entire presidency was broadcasted by him. He was committing crimes and telling us. He wasn't
not only
necessarily
that,
name the crimes. Name the crimes, please.
Not only that, 75
the
reporters.
Insurrection that just took place.
That was not an insurrection. There was nobody armed but the Capitol Police inside. Nobody had any arms.
So
there was it was a guided tour once they got in. Why won't they release the tour? Why won't they release the 1,400 hours of video? Because it was a guided tour after the initial breach.
Listen to.
There was nobody overtaking anything. They were shown in by back door.
They had military equipment. They had roped.
No, they didn't.
Okay, it's all on film, as is Trump's speech prior to them storming the Capitol.
And
it's all
breach
recorded.
Started while Trump was still talking. The breach started while Trump was still talking. It wasn't even the people at the Trump rally that were the ones who breached.
The insurrectionists themselves said that they were storming the Capitol at the direction of the president.
But the Trump rally was still going on. Trump was still talking. So all of those folks at the rally were still there.
So are you seriously arguing that Trump did not send his voters out in order to overthrow the election?
I am seriously telling you that Donald Trump did not explicitly tell them to go overthrow the Capitol.
He's not going to explicitly say it. That would be a crime for him to explicitly say, go kill people and take the government. So he has to
have a rally. That's political. We have political rallies all the time. And there's inflammatory speech that goes on in every political rally.
Right now, we're talking about intention.
What about the FBI informants who haven't been charged, who were on film on January 6th, who were the agitators of the insurrection that you call?
Like I said, in order for you, people have to know what investigation looks like. You don't have to say something to be guilty of something.
Okay, all right. I come from if you have to say it, you can't.
As a black man, you have to explicitly say, "Hey, guys, I'm committing this crime in order to be found guilty."
That's
of
different.
A crime.
That's an action. That's an action. If I do something physically and commit a crime, that is an action. If I say, "Hey, man, I'm going to go stake something out," you don't know what that means. That means I could just be going to look at it.
That's not the way our court system and law works. It doesn't work like that.
What do you mean it doesn't work like that?
It doesn't work like
that for me for my whole life.
We speak in code constantly, and
I don't
understand.
The mob spoke in code.
Listen. We as black folks have been speaking in code.
The mob has spoken code.
Speak what you want.
Criminals speak in code. Does that mean they weren't guilty?
Right. Facts.
Apples and oranges. I'm talking about me as a black man. I don't speak in code. I speak my truth. Always have. That's what's wrong with a lot of black people.
You're not being questioned. We're questioning what the ex-president's intentions.
He didn't tell him to. Did he tell them to storm the Capitol?
He didn't have to
and bust through a barricade.
He did. He said he started firing them up and tell them that it's time for them to take back their country and all of this stuff.
Show me where he said that.
It can't
Show me
be.
where he
It
said
can't.
exactly that. He did say,
Come on.
it's time for you to
Mark,
take-
nobody
That's
has to
political
say
rhetoric.
that they're racist in order to be racist.
Right.
That's political rhetoric.
It's
Come
not
on.
rhetoric. You
All
have
right.
to you have to question
Okay,
his
Donald Trump
intent.
is the Antichrist. He's the worst thing ever. Let's move
He's
on.
not the Antichrist. He's too
Not
much of a
president.
moron.
Who cares?
He's too much of a moron to be
He's
the
not the
Antichrist.
president no more. Who cares? Let's move on. Let's talk about what we're talking about.
It's extremely important for us to get to the bottom of what happened, because again, even though he wasn't successful, let me finish. Even though he wasn't successful, there is going to be another attempt. And a lot of what Donald Trump had done was chip away at our democracy, and it was intentional. He was self-dealing, and he did a lot to damage us. Our standing in the world has diminished, and he did a lot of very harmful things. He's responsible. He's responsible largely for the vitriol between both parties.
No,
And he was
not.
in cahoots with the Russians, and that's
No,
obvious.
Prove it. Show me proof. This is emotional rhetoric.
I will prove it. I will prove it. From the moment he got elected, they were trying to set up secret back channels to Russia. Now tell me why the heck
You work at the White House, right?
Let me give Mark an example of what I was talking about, right? When I talked to you about how Black folks know about how investigations go, right? I'm going to give you an example of it. When they went and they was on Capitol grounds, they actually went to court and said that they weren't guilty. Listen, listen, let me break this down.
Who did?
Listen, the Capitol rioters. Listen, let me say this. When you are in a place, Black folks know that if you are in a place of a crime and you are doing something or being on property that's not yours, that makes you guilty of trespassing.
Criminal trespass, right.
Okay, now, if something goes on that property while you are trespassing on that property, what you think? The feds' law is way more sharper than the states.
Yeah, but you reaching, brother.
No, it's not a reach. This is the way the feds work. They got RICOs, they got all type of positions to be.
But if that's the case, everybody who breached should be brought up on the murder charge of Ashley Babbitt. And that's not the case.
No. See, that was no. That's not the. We're talking about an insurrection on the United States government.
Nobody had any weapons, man. It wasn't an insurrection.
This man died from being hit over the head.
It wasn't an unlawful
Capitol police officers said. Police officers said that they had weapons, and we see it on tape.
No, you don't. Show me a tape where you see people with weapons.
We saw an American flag being somebody hit.
They didn't have any guns. They didn't have any mortars or any explosives. They have nothing like that.
What is?
That's not an insurrection.
First of all, these people had backpacks, and you don't know what they had in those backpacks. You don't know what.
But the FBI does, and there was nothing ever published.
You have a guy that I think is still at large, or possibly a female, who planted a bomb nearby the DNC. You have what do they call those rip ties? What's the thing you put around your arm to like handcuffs? A zip tie. I said rip tie. A zip tie. You had them.
You had people beating people with the American flag.
You can't assume that everybody there was a Trump supporting, swinging from his ball sack. You know that there could have been infiltrators. I'm not saying there was. There could have been. And for anybody to say
it could have been a leprechaun there. What relevance is that?
Leprechauns are not real. It couldn't have been a leprechaun. They're not real.
And listen, at the end of the day, the American people need a lot more education on laws. They need more education on how our democracy works. where we've been as a country and where we try to go. And that's what we have these discussions for, so people can get smarter and for us to get smarter as well when we discuss these issues. Thank you guys for being on the show. It was great. Thank you.